Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what unfolded in Tehran 72 hours ago demands directness. What we are witnessing is not a routine arms transfer. It is not another chapter in the Russia-Iran defense partnership that Western analysts have been tracking since 2016. What we are witnessing is the most significant shift in Middle Eastern air superiority since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And most people watching their evening news have absolutely no idea it just happened. I am looking at satellite imagery that has been circulating among defense analysts at 3 separate think tanks for the past 96 hours. And I need you to understand what it shows. What it shows is not another shipment of older S-300 systems that Iran has operated for years. It is not the S-400 variant that Turkey purchased despite NATO objections. What it shows is the telltale radar configuration of S-500 Prometheus batteries, 6 of them positioned in a defensive arc across northern Iran that creates what military strategists call an anti-access area denial bubble covering approximately 400,000 square kilometers of airspace. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this changes everything about Israeli operational planning in the region, why the F-35 stealth advantage that Tel Aviv has relied on since 2017 has been functionally neutralized, and why your government is not telling you that the rules of engagement in the Middle East were just rewritten overnight. This is the kind of analysis you are not getting from mainstream sources. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively discussed in closed-door Pentagon briefings right now, while public statements pretend nothing has changed. Let's start with understanding what the S-500 actually represents, because the technical specifications matter more than the political theater surrounding this transfer. The S-500 Prometheus is Russia's most advanced air defense system, designed specifically to defeat fifth-generation stealth aircraft and hypersonic missiles. The system became operational in Russian forces in 2021, and until 72 hours ago, it had never been exported to any foreign military. Not to China, not to India, not to any of Russia's treaty allies. Iran is the first. The effective range of the S-500 against fighter-sized targets is 600 kilometers. To put that in perspective, the distance from Tehran to Tel Aviv is approximately 1,500 kilometers, but the distance from the Iranian border to Israel's northern air bases is less than 400 kilometers. This means that S-500 batteries positioned in northwestern Iran can track and engage Israeli aircraft before they even cross into Syrian airspace. The system operates in multiple frequency bands simultaneously, including L-band and VHF radars specifically designed to detect stealth aircraft by exploiting the physical limitations of radar-absorbent coatings optimized for X-band frequencies. According to Defense Security Asia and confirmed by multiple Russian military sources, the S-500 can simultaneously track up to 10 ballistic targets or 20 aerodynamic targets and engage up to 5 of them concurrently. Colonel Mikhail Kodarinok, a Russian military analyst and former air defense officer, has stated publicly that the system represents, and I am quoting him directly here, a fundamental paradigm shift in the physics of air defense, making conventional penetration tactics obsolete against prepared defenders. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing that the strategic calculations you have been hearing from official sources just became dangerously outdated. Now, let's talk about what Russia actually delivered and why the timing tells you everything about Moscow's assessment of regional stability. Announcement number 1, the delivery package. And this one matters more than the hardware itself, because it reveals Russian strategic intent. According to reporting by the Moscow Times and confirmed by Iranian Defense Ministry sources speaking to Tasnim news agency, Russia did not simply deliver 6 S-500 batteries and walk away. The transfer included a comprehensive integrated air defense package consisting of the missile systems themselves, 4 early warning radar stations, complete command and control infrastructure, and most significantly, a training contingent of approximately 200 Russian technical specialists who will remain embedded with Iranian air defense forces for a minimum of 18 months. That 18-month timeline is not arbitrary. It represents the training cycle necessary to achieve independent operational capability. The fact that Russia is committing personnel for this duration signals that Moscow views this as a long-term strategic investment, not a transactional arms sale. The radar stations included in the package are 91N6E panoramic early warning radars with a detection range of 1,200 kilometers. These radars create overlapping coverage that extends from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, from the Iraqi border to the Afghanistan frontier. The missiles themselves use a combination of kinetic kill vehicles and proximity-fused fragmentation warheads. Each battery includes 40 missiles with reload capacity. Iranian air defense doctrine, developed with Russian advisors over the past 15 years, emphasizes redundant coverage and rapid relocation. The S-500 units were delivered with autonomous power generation and mobility platforms, meaning they can be repositioned within 4 hours and operational within 6. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, and this is the part that changes Israeli operational planning at its foundation. The S-500 system has demonstrated capability against the exact profile of aircraft that Israel has relied on for regional air superiority. We know from Russian testing data published in Military Thought Journal that S-500 interceptors achieved successful target engagements against simulated stealth aircraft profiles at ranges exceeding 400 kilometers during trials conducted between 2019 and 2021. The Israeli Air Force operates approximately 36 F-35I Adir aircraft, a variant customized with Israeli avionics and weapon systems. These aircraft entered operational service in 2017 and have been the backbone of Israeli long-range strike capability ever since. The F-35's stealth characteristics are optimized for threats operating in X-band frequencies, the spectrum used by most legacy air defense systems. The aircraft's radar cross-section from frontal aspects is estimated at 0. 1 square meters, roughly equivalent to a large bird. But here is where the physics becomes unforgiving. Stealth technology works by shaping surfaces and applying radar-absorbent materials to minimize returns in specific frequency ranges. The S-500 operates in VHF and L-band frequencies where the F-35's physical dimensions, approximately 15 meters in length with a 13-meter wingspan, create resonance effects that cannot be eliminated through coding technology. At these wavelengths, the aircraft's shape itself becomes the reflector. Dr. Carlo Kopp, an Australian defense analyst specializing in air defense systems, published research in 2018 demonstrating that VHF radar systems can achieve detection ranges against 5th-generation stealth aircraft comparable to detection ranges against 4th-generation conventional fighters. His analysis, peer-reviewed and published in Air Power Australia, concluded that the notion of stealth aircraft being invisible to all radar is a fundamental misunderstanding of electromagnetic physics propagated by defense contractors and accepted uncritically by military planners. Stay with me because this is where the strategic narrative completely changes and where Israeli assumptions about operational freedom become impossible to maintain. The S-500 deployment means that Israeli aircraft cannot approach Iranian airspace, Syrian airspace, or Iraqi airspace without being tracked from the moment they take off. The system's long-range engagement capability means they can be engaged while still in Israeli airspace if they are on an approach vector toward Iranian targets. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The timing of this transfer coincides with 3 other developments that together represent a coordinated realignment of regional military architecture. First, Russia announced on April 2nd that it is establishing a permanent naval presence at Iran's Chabahar port facility, the same port where India has invested $800 million in infrastructure development. Second, China concluded a 5-year extension of its 25-year comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran on March 28th, including provisions for joint military exercises and intelligence sharing. Third, and this has been deliberately underreported in Western media, Turkey announced on April 5th that it is suspending its participation in NATO integrated air defense exercises, pending resolution of what Ankara called unacceptable restrictions on its defense procurement sovereignty. These three developments are not coincidental. They represent what Chinese strategic doctrine calls creating irreversible facts, altering the security landscape through coordinated actions that compel adversaries to accept new realities rather than contest them. Russia provides the air defense umbrella. China provides the economic integration and political backing. Turkey creates fissures in NATO cohesion. Iran becomes effectively untargetable by conventional Israeli strike packages. The implications extend beyond Israeli operational planning. Every American military planner who has war-gamed a potential strike on Iranian nuclear facilities has relied on assumptions about air superiority that no longer hold. The entire architecture of deterrence in the Middle East was built on the premise that Israel retained the capability to conduct deep strikes against Iranian strategic assets if diplomatic efforts to constrain Iran's nuclear program failed. That capability has been functionally eliminated without a single shot being fired. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The public story is about arms sales and regional tensions. The hidden story is about the collapse of a 30-year American strategic framework and the desperate attempts to pretend that collapse is not happening. When Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked about the S-500 transfer during a press conference on April 7th, he described it as concerning but manageable and suggested that American defensive capabilities in the region remain robust. This statement is what military analysts call strategic messaging, meaning it is designed to shape perceptions rather than describe reality. The actual assessment circulating within defense planning circles, according to sources who spoke to Breaking Defense on condition of anonymity, is that the transfer represents a fundamental erosion of American ability to project power in the region. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant responded by announcing that Israel is accelerating procurement of extended-range standoff munitions and exploring options for enhanced stealth capabilities. This response is tactically rational, but strategically insufficient. Standoff weapons require launch platforms that can survive long enough to release them. Enhanced stealth improvements cannot overcome the physics of wavelength and aircraft dimensions. What Israel is announcing is that it is investing in capabilities to mitigate a problem that cannot actually be mitigated, hoping that the appearance of adaptation will deter adversaries who understand the technical limitations. Think carefully about what this represents. When a regional power loses its primary strategic advantage, when the technology it relied on to maintain deterrence is neutralized by a system its adversary acquired from a great power patron, that is not a tactical setback. That is not a temporary challenge requiring doctrinal adjustment. That is a verdict on the limits of regional hegemony in a multipolar world where peer competitors provide strategic protection to their aligned partners. If you operate a business with supply chain exposure to Middle Eastern energy markets, what happened in Tehran 72 hours ago is not a defense story. It is a risk calculus story about what happens when the probability of military escalation changes and insurance markets reprice stability assumptions. If you are an American taxpayer funding a security architecture built on promises of regional dominance, this is a return on investment story about what $800 billion in annual defense spending actually purchases when adversaries coordinate effectively. These effects are showing up in oil futures pricing, testing, which spiked 4% in the 72 hours following initial reports of the S-500 delivery. They are showing up in revised Pentagon budget requests that will seek additional funding for counter-air defense capabilities. They are showing up in quiet diplomatic conversations where American officials are asking Arab partners whether they are comfortable with an emboldened Iran operating under a Russian air defense umbrella, while those partners are privately calculating whether their own security interests are better served by accommodation than confrontation. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome follows the same trajectory. The Peloponnesian War, the conflict between Athens and Sparta that consumed the Greek world for 27 years, did not end with Athenian or Spartan victory. It ended with both powers exhausted, their treasuries depleted, their populations decimated, their fleets destroyed. And who emerged as the dominant power in the Mediterranean? Macedon, a kingdom that had been dismissed as peripheral and backward, led by Philip II and his son Alexander, who conquered the Greek world precisely because the Greeks had destroyed each other's capacity to resist. The parallel is exact. The United States is Athens, convinced of its exceptional destiny and superior system, extending itself across multiple theaters while its treasury strains under the weight of commitments. Israel is Sparta, a militarized society that believes its tactical excellence will overcome strategic disadvantages. Russia is Macedon, patient and calculating, waiting for the combatants to exhaust themselves while building capabilities and alliances. China is Persia, the distant economic colossus that will inherit regional influence regardless of who wins the immediate conflicts. The Athenian fleet was the F-35 of its era, a technological advantage that created confidence bordering on arrogance. The Syracusan expedition that destroyed that fleet was the strategic equivalent of the S-500 transfer, a moment when reality demonstrated that technological superiority cannot overcome logistical overextension and adversarial adaptation. The lesson that every strategist learns and that every generation seems determined to relearn through bloodshed is that empires do not fall through single catastrophic defeats. They fall through accumulating commitments that cannot be sustained and adversaries who coordinate to exploit the gaps. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here, and the direction we take will be determined in the next 6 to 18 months. Path 1, de-escalation through acceptance. Israel and the United States acknowledge that the strategic landscape has changed, that the capability to conduct deep strikes into Iranian territory no longer exists at acceptable risk levels, and that regional security must be negotiated rather than imposed. This path requires abandoning 30 years of strategic doctrine, accepting Iranian influence in Syria and Iraq, and pivoting toward defensive postures. The probability of this path is low, perhaps 20%, because it requires political leaders to acknowledge failure and bureaucracies to accept that their planning assumptions were wrong. Path 2, escalation through proxy. Unable to strike Iran directly, Israel expands operations against Iranian proxies in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, hoping to degrade Iranian regional influence through sustained attrition. The United States increases military aid to Israel and regional partners while imposing additional sanctions on Iran and Russia. This path is the most likely, perhaps 60% probability, because it allows policymakers to appear active without confronting the fundamental strategic shift. The problem with this path is that it burns resources without addressing the core issue, eventually leading to either path 1 through exhaustion or path 3 through miscalculation. Path 3, direct confrontation. A crisis emerges, perhaps involving Iranian uranium enrichment levels crossing a threshold that triggers Israeli action, and despite the presence of S-500 systems, Israel conducts strikes anyway, accepting aircraft losses as the price of preventing a nuclear-armed Iran. This scenario has perhaps 20% probability, but carries catastrophic consequences. Russian technical personnel embedded with Iranian air defense forces would likely be casualties in any such strike. The regional conflict that would follow could draw in actors who currently sit on the sidelines. I think we are on path 2, but the margin between path 2 and path 3 is narrower than official statements acknowledge. The S-500 transfer has made the costs of path 3 dramatically higher, but it has not eliminated the scenarios that could trigger it. Iranian nuclear progress continues. Israeli political pressures for action intensify. American credibility concerns multiply. The paradox of the S-500 deployment is that it may have made large-scale conflict less likely by making it more costly, but it has also made limited conflicts more probable by eliminating the threat of decisive Israeli retaliation. Here are the questions I want you to take away and think about seriously. First, if stealth technology can be defeated by physics that have been understood since the 1960s, what does that tell you about the reliability of the strategic assumptions underpinning 70 years of American air power doctrine? Second, if Russia is willing to transfer its most advanced systems to Iran, what does that tell you about Moscow's assessment of whether its interests are better served by stability or by challenging American regional dominance? Third, if Turkey, a NATO member, is distancing itself from alliance-integrated defense structures at the same moment that Russia is providing strategic air defense to Iran, what does that tell you about the cohesion of Western security architecture? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me whether you think Israel will accept the new limitations or attempt to overcome them through technological adaptation or risk acceptance. Tell me whether you think American security commitments in the Middle East can be sustained when the military advantage that guaranteed those commitments has been neutralized. We will keep tracking every development in Tehran, in Tel Aviv, in Moscow, and in Washington, because this story is far from over, and the next 6 months will tell us whether we are witnessing a managed transition to a new regional order or the opening phase of a wider confrontation. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone you know who is trying to understand what the S-500 transfer actually means beneath the surface level reporting. Turn on notifications so you do not miss our next breakdown, because the implications of what happened 72 hours ago will continue unfolding for years, and most analysts are still processing what it means. That is what we do here every single day. Cut through the official narratives and show you what is actually happening. We will see you in the next analysis.